Hi everyone, welcome back. Welcome to another day, another Bible study. 2 Kings chapter 7 today. We're going to talk about the end of the siege and the starvation of the city of Samaria in the kingdom of Israel. PDF is available online. As far as our dates for this chapter, we're going to place these events somewhere between the dates of 895 and 885 BC. Our characters are pretty much going to be the same as the last chapter, except for a few exceptions. 4 exceptions. We have Elisha, he's the prophet of God. We have the king of Israel, who this is almost certainly Jehoram, the son of Ahab. Then we have Ben-Hadad, who's the king of Syria. He attacks the city of Samaria in Israel in this chapter. He besieges it in his army. And then our 4 exceptions are the 4 lepers. These are 4 men with leprosy, which was a bacterial disease. There was no cure during that time. They are going to save the city of Samaria from their starvation by reporting the retreat of the Syrian army. More on that in our outline. And then as far as our locations, I've already mentioned a couple times that Samaria was the capital city of the northern kingdom of Israel. And we're also going to talk about the Jordan River. Jordan River kind of splits our map in half. It sits between the Sea of Galilee in the north and the Dead Sea in the south. All right, so we're over to our outline section. I've only got one section for the outline of this chapter, and that is verses 1 through 20. Somewhat short chapter. 4 lepers save Samaria after God causes the Syrian army to retreat. So this picks up where we left off in the last chapter. Remember, the city of Samaria had been besieged by the Syrians, and there was a tremendous amount of starvation in the city. We talked about how the people were eating donkey heads and bird poop and even other people. We talked about that in chapter 6. Not a pleasant chapter. Now, also remember that this starvation got so bad that the king wanted Elisha, the prophet of God, to be killed. But that order was never carried out, in part because Elisha prophesied that the very next day the starvation would end. The very next day, food would be available in abundance in the city of Samaria. Well, how is that going to work itself out? Well, we're going to find out in this chapter. The king's captain, though, scoffed at this prophecy, and as a consequence, Elisha told him that he would get to see this abundance of food, but he would never get to taste it for himself. The scene then shifts to the gate of Samaria, where there were 4 lepers, 4 sick men, and they decided that, hey, it's better. Why don't we try to surrender to the Syrians? Maybe they'll show us mercy. Maybe they'll give us something to eat. Maybe we can stay alive if we surrender to the Syrians and they're merciful to us, rather than definitely dying here and starving at the gate of this city. So the lepers left at twilight and they went to the Syrian camp, but when they reached the outskirts of the camp, they found something really interesting. All of the Syrians had fled, and all of their stuff, all their riches, their armor, their gold, their clothing, their food was all right there. They had left it behind like they left in a hurry. They didn't leave in a hurry. God had worked a miracle. God caused the Syrians to hear the sound of a great army. And they assumed that the people of Israel and Samaria must have hired another nation to come and to make war with them, like they hired the Egyptians. So they heard the sound of this great army. They thought, oh no, Israel has some backup, and they fled and retreated. So what do you think the 4 lepers did? Well, first thing that they did was they feasted on the food, and then they took some of the clothes and the valuables and the gold, and they hid it so that they could find it later, and so nobody else would get it. But after a while, their consciences started to feel a little bad, and they said this, quote, "We are not doing right. Let us go and tell the king's household. We should tell all the people who are starving in the city what's going on." So the lepers went back to the city and they reported that the Syrians had retreated. They reported this to the gatekeeper. The gatekeeper reported it to the king, and the king thought, no, this is some kind of trick. The Syrians are trying to draw us out of the city, and then they're going to pounce on us and attack. So he sent 2 horsemen to scout out the Syrians and to figure out what had happened to them. They scouted the land all the way to the river Jordan, and along the way they found evidence that the Syrians actually had retreated. So when these horsemen brought back the news, the people of Samaria went rushing out of their city to plunder the Syrian camp and to finally get some good food to eat. Now, how does Elisha's prophecy come true that the captain was going to be able to see this food, but he was never going to be able to taste it for himself? As Elisha prophesied, flour and barley were available in abundance in the city, but the king's captain never got to taste it because the people were in such a hurry to get it that they trampled him and killed him. So that was the consequence of his lack of faith and him mocking the prophet of God. And that is 2 Kings chapter 7. Now for our application. What can we learn from these 4 lepers who went to the Syrian camp? The lepers decided that they were just going to put their hope in an offer of mercy. Maybe the Syrians will offer us mercy. So they went out and they gave themselves up to them, or so they thought they were doing. They thought this was a better option because the only thing that awaited them otherwise was dying. And the way it turned out, the result of that decision was better than anything that they ever could have imagined. And so here's a question for you. What awaits you in your current state? What awaits you at the end of this lifetime? Is there any outcome that doesn't lead to death? The only choice that you have other than death, and here I'm talking about physical death and spiritual death, is to put your hope in an offer of mercy. That's the mercy that God offers for salvation, for eternal life. And here's one thing that I can guarantee you, and that is that if you put your hope in the mercy of God, the outcome of that decision is going to be better than anything that you ever could have imagined.